When I was little, maybe around 4 years old, I lived in Okinawa, Japan with my Japanese mother and my American father, who at that time was stationed at one of the military bases on the island. We lived off base in a house and things were pretty great. But before I get to the story, let me give you a little bit of background information about my family. So, before I was born, my mother was dealing with the Yakuza for some time and she ended up owing them money for some reason. She managed to get out of that situation without paying them when she got with my Marine father, and the Yakuza would never hurt an American. So my mother knew that she was safe as long as she was with him and on the military base. Now, I have no idea why we lived off base at that time when I was born, but we did. And one evening, I was in my room upstairs playing when my mother comes in, frantically shutting the door behind her, locking it and turning off the lights. She tells me to be quiet, and when I ask her what the matter was, she just scoots next to me and I can silently hear her crying. My father was at work, I believe, at the time of the incident was happening. My mother and I heard the front door slam, and then we heard footsteps walking up the stairs. We see the silhouette of the person walking the hallway from the light peeking from underneath my bedroom door. My mother, who is panicking like crazy now and praying in her mother tongue, gets a hanger to use as a weapon. At this point, I am crying like crazy too. The doorknob starts to jiggle and it goes on for some time until all of a sudden it just stops. We believe that they're gone, but we didn't dare leave until the police came, and that's all I really remember from that time. As an adult now, 23, it took me years to put the story together. My mum still denies it like she does when I ask her about the certain parts of her past that she doesn't want to talk about. My dad doesn't even bother to answer the question and just disregards it. But I know what happened, even if it wasn't the Yakuza. Someone other than my father came into the house and they tried to get into my room, but thankfully they didn't. So one night while preparing for a camping party that I was going to throw as a teenager, it was pre-twilight, so like 7 or 8 p.m. during the summer. I had sent my 2 friends to collect buds and booze for said party while I tended the fire and collected wood. It was a nice secluded spot up a massive hill, but like 3/4 of a mile hike on foot. A place that I'm normally most comfortable and know pretty well because I grew up here. I know of bears, coyotes, and once I saw a mountain lion on our property, but what I heard when my friends left shortly after really didn't sound like any of those things. It started after 15 minutes when my friends left. First, the rustling in the leaves and branches out in the edge of the woods, but far enough away from the fire that I couldn't see it. It definitely got closer though, and I could tell that it was pretty big. We do have horses, and they do graze up on the campsite every now and then, and I know how they sound trudging through, but this wasn't a time that they were up in that pasture or camping spot. Whatever it was, it got closer, like it was checking out the smoke, but far enough out in the woods to where I couldn't see it, but I could definitely hear that it was there. And then it made a sound. It was a hoot type sound. It came right from where I could tell that it was, like it was hooting at me, loud and low. It sort of sounded like growling at the same time too. It's really hard to explain, but I put my back to the fire, chilled to the bone when I heard it. It was unlike anything I've ever heard, and I've looked for sounds like it since, but have never found anything like it. In any case, I kept watching the direction the sound came from with just a machete that I brought for kindling chopping. Cursing myself now for not bringing a rifle for protection. It felt like hours of the hooting sounds and this growling and the pacing back and forth, scaring me half to death, and I'm not one to be afraid out in the dark on that campsite normally, but I just wanted my friends to return at this point. I didn't want to leave the safety of the warm light, and it was in reality just 1 hour, but Eventually, I saw the lights from my friend's truck crest the hill, and as soon as I saw them, I sprinted towards them as I heard the leaves rustle in the woods again. I guess it took off, but it scared me enough to now always carry a gun with me at all times on my property, because that wasn't anything that I normally would hear, and the only way I know how to describe it was that it was big, curious, and hooted sort of extremely low, almost like a growl, but nothing like a normal owl or coyote or anything like that. Back in 2001, my parents bought a property to build my childhood home on the south side of Chicago. Some backstory on the property that we only found out after the house was built was that the marsh or the swamp on the property used to be a dumping ground for the bodies from the Italian mafia in Chicago. The black tar that was in the swamp made it impossible to get out of, and the bodies just disappeared. Fast forward to when my family lived there. We had a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a wonderful yard, swing in the backyard, and even a basement that my parents let us write our names all over. It was a huge highlight of our house as kids. And in that basement, we also had a laundry room that was around the corner of the stairs, and some ballet mirrors leading to it. Ever since I was a kid, I dreaded having to go down to that basement and always felt like someone was watching me. It was never just a kid being scared of the basement ordeal, too. Something truly felt off. One day I was walking down the stairs of the basement, and out of the corner of my eye, looking through the mirror, a man was stood there, staring directly at me. He was tall with a flat cap and a scrappy beard, plain as day. I tried to scream, but it felt like all the air was just gone, just like in a dream. He started coming towards the stairs, and quickly as I could, I sprinted up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. As a child, I was a wonderfully perpetual liar and knew no one would actually believe me, so I never said a word. A few weeks went by, and I tried to put the image of the man that I saw out of my head, but after that, it just never felt safe in the house. The scariest instance, though, was when I was grabbing something out of my parents' room and again felt someone staring at me. But for fear of seeing the man again, I began to run out of the room. The only thing, though, was that I couldn't actually move. I stood there just like a statue, unable to do anything except cry. I felt a pressure on my chest, like someone was holding me back from moving forward. After what felt like forever of being frozen, I finally was able to let out a small cry, and my mother ran into the room and grabbed me. Strangely, too, she had to yank me so hard out of that spot as if I was sort of like a mouse stuck in a sticky trap. As we fled the room, the door slammed behind us, and my mum took me outside where I felt like I was finally able to breathe. After that, we never really talked about that moment. And apart from my own traumatizing encounter, my younger sister also seemed to be on edge in this house. She could never sleep alone and would frequently scream in the night. This will come into play later. Another thing to note too is that around the house, things would move locations. Doors would open randomly, and we all left the house, and it was in disarray when we returned, as if someone was partying there. But my parents never said a word to us about anything that happened and carried on cleaning as if it was normal, given that my 3 sisters and I were from ages 9 to 5 at that time, so I'm sure nothing was going to be discussed anyway. Things kept happening over the years, though, and I would frequently see the man staring through the windows as we came back into the house, around corners, and even sitting on a chair in our living room once. Eventually, though, we had to move due to my parents losing our house in the recession, but I never forgot about that house. After we got older, though, we all were having dinner one night and were reminiscing the old house. I brought up that moment where I was stuck in the bedroom, and my mum's face turned white as she told me that she saw a tall man with a flat cap and scrappy beard holding me there, and didn't want to frighten me at the time. As she described the man, I saw everyone's face drop because apparently we'd all had encounters with this guy. My older sister would see him as she played dolls in the basement, my dad in his garage once, my mum with me, but the scariest story was from my younger sister. When she was a child, the man would visit the edge of her bed and stare directly over her, telling her to get out, and if you don't go, I'm going to kill your family. You're all going to die. I'll kill you. Her screams every night were not from childhood nightmares, but an actual nightmare that we all seemed to be living in. She would wake up with scratches from the man that we just assumed were from her childhood eczema, but no, apparently he actually touched her. To this day, we never bring up that old house or drive past the street where it sits. It still terrifies me to today to think about all of the experiences in the house, and I'll never, ever go back there. While it will always be the home that I grew up in, I truly consider it to be a place in hell. This happened like 3 or 4 years ago, but I still remember all the details because it freaked me out so bad. So me and my brother, we had decided to sleep on our mattresses in our back lounge room, basically a sleepover but with a sibling. However, when we actually went to go to sleep, he changed his mind and went back to his room. Keep in mind, he was like 9 and wasn't really used to it, but I chose to stay instead of going back. But I ended up not being able to sleep very well. At the time, the washing had recently been done, so there was a bunch of black baskets sitting out there. For context, our back lounge room directly connects to our dining room, basically one huge room split into 2. The baskets were in the dining room section, aka directly behind my head. So I turned my head back around to look at the baskets, just sort of bored out of my mind. And when I did, I saw this black shadow crawl on all 4s from behind one of the baskets to another. I instantly got up and looked around the room, but when I did, there was nothing there. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning when this happened, so nobody else was awake, but I was scared out of my mind, and I didn't go back to sleep until it was like 5 in the morning. I still have no idea what that thing was, but I was too scared to check if something was actually there, so I really don't have a way to confirm what it was or if it was just a trick of my eyes, but man, it looks so real. I don't know why, but I recently started thinking about an event that happened roughly around 2013 to 2014 when I was about 14 years old. Now, I've never experienced hallucinations in my life, and my family hasn't either. Back then, the Slender Man hype was at its peak, and of course I wanted to reenact the game with my brother. So I drew some figures, similar to the game, on some A4 paper sheets and went into the woods next to my residence. It was midday, and my brother, 2 years younger than me, was fiddling with some sticks at the entrance of the woods. Meanwhile, I was nailing the sheets of paper to some trees. Even though it was sunny, I felt like this place had a weird vibe to it this day, though. So, dumb me continued nailing the papers to the trees, thinking that the atmosphere would make the game even better. About 15 to 20 minutes after I started nailing the papers, I came upon an old fallen tree with its roots sticking out of the ground. As I passed it, I felt something strange going on. It wasn't a sound, just a feeling that I had to turn around. As I did exactly that, I saw an approximately 2.5 meter tall figure, all black, except its face, standing about maybe 4 or 5 meters away from me. It had no facial features and just stood there, watching me. The whole encounter lasted about 2 seconds before I just turned around, screamed at the top of my lungs, and bolted towards my brother's location. I was in total panic mode, running like my life depended upon it. I felt relieved when I finally saw my brother fiddling with some rocks on the side of the road. I tried explaining what happened to him, but he just thought that I was messing with him. Well, the game was cancelled, and I made sure to stay by his side while taking off all of the pictures that I nailed to the trees. I went back to the spot of the encounter with him, examined it clearly, trying to tell myself that I must have just seen an illusion or something, but nothing even remotely resembled that figure, or was even that black in that area. I kept this encounter mostly to myself and never really talked about it anywhere, thinking that everyone would just write it off as me being crazy or something. My family are all heavily religious people, unlike me, who was an atheist too. But the whole thing happened in France, in the 92nd department. To this day, I still have no explanation to what I saw. Maybe it was just Slender Man in my head. Maybe it was something else, though. I didn't get a clear look at it since all of my instincts were telling me to just run, but I'm pretty sure that this thing really was there. So I'm 30-some years old. I lived at my brother's house for my whole childhood. No one died there that I know of. The house was built in the 60s or 70s, and everyone in my house had experienced seeing shadow people. More or less, I wanted to share my experiences because people that haven't had paranormal experiences just look at me weird, so I figured some of you guys might not do that. When I was roughly around 10 years old, my mum and younger sister were all laying in bed. The bed was a bunk bed with a twin upper bed and full-size lower bed. I was laying next to my mum and my younger sister was up top asleep. My mum and I were reading books and just talking occasionally, when I heard the floor creak and looked up at the doorway. And there was a black figure. Half of their body was in the bedroom, their hands sort of wrapped around the doorway like they were just peeking. It seemed to be about 5 feet tall, and the thing that I remember the most were its piercing green eyes. No one else saw it though, because as soon as I saw it, it ducked back around the corner and I went out to take a look, but it was gone. The figure that we all saw the most though was a tall, broad, male-looking figure. The reason that I say male is because he was really big and wide. You never see anything beside his silhouette though, but when I was 22, I moved back after having my daughter to live with my mum to help with my dad. He was dying at the time. My dad would pass 3 months before the next incident, but this figure was not my father. I unfortunately never got to see him, but I woke up to make my daughter a bottle. I left the same room as the last story and walked into the hallway leading into the living room. Now, the living room has this big picture window across the room. The windows give light from the passing cars, the moon, or any outdoor light. We were looking at the ground and shuffling through it about 2 or 3 in the morning and looked up and saw the tall dark silhouette just standing about 3 feet from me. Now, he was really big, but this time I noticed that he was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I ran to the kitchen and hit the closet light, but when I did, it was gone. To be honest with you as well, I didn't even think paranormal at first. I mean, it looked so real and the whole hat thing was just really odd, and so I thought intruder maybe? Like I said, when I turned around, there was nobody there. My mother and sister still live there, and they experience random things occasionally. We've never been hurt, thankfully, but I don't know. Have any of you guys ever had experiences of piercing green eyes or shadowy figures? A tall brimmed hat man? I know, it sounds really weird, but it's the truth, and I'm hoping that you guys might know more about this. I want to lead this by saying that I have never been into anything paranormal. I'm not sure how I feel on the topic, to be honest, and I suppose you could say that I've never really believed. I still don't know how to feel, but I can say that I've never seen something out of the corner of my eye so consistently and often, and at least when I have, it's always been something distinguishably different from the last. We bought a house, and I got no weird feelings from it like I did at other houses. My house has one room that is deteriorated from water and needs to be redone, and with the doorknob removed, the latch on the outside of the door, it's a little bit unsettling to say the least. We sort of call it the dungeon. But the first night in our new room, my husband was with me, so I can confirm that I'm not alone in at least one of these. We were sitting so we can see directly down the hall. The two kids' rooms are at either end. We hear a sound and expect it's one of them trying to creep out. We think that we've confirmed it because we see a shadow move on the wall and another creak. I tell him to go investigate, and he insists that our son was fast asleep and he couldn't have gotten back to bed that fast without much more noise. The cat was asleep in my daughter's room as well, sitting sort of loaf style with his nose touching the wall. That was also very unusual for him, but we just moved, so I let it go. My dog barked and growled at my bedroom ceiling for the first few nights though. Also odd, but we just moved and he's a puppy, so I only joked about how dogs can see things that we don't and forgot about it. Since then, I have had several moments where I see movement at the top of the stairs. It's always the same color, I guess. I wish I could say that I was joking, but the only way that I can describe it is sort of like cloud-colored. And almost every time it is movement towards one specific room, but it comes from different angles. By the time that I look, it's already went behind the corner though, and there's never anyone upstairs when I see these. The first time that I saw it too, not out of the corner of my eye, I thought that I was watching a fur tumbleweed bounce down the stairs. We have a golden retriever, and it does happen, believe it or not. I got up to retrieve the ball of hair, and when I did, there was nothing there. But I sat there and watched it slowly and softly bounce down at least 3 steps. This was like 20 seconds worth of intense staring. I didn't have my glasses on, so the detail wasn't all there, but it was what I imagine a fur tumbleweed would look like to me from that distance. It moved strangely though, but I guess we're still learning where all of the drafts come in at, so I shrugged it off, but still mentioned it to my husband because we both still chuckle about the first night. But today was the worst. So I'd come out of the bathroom, which leaves a sort of direct line of sight into my bedroom, and I could have sworn that I saw the dog jump off the bed, and I even heard the corresponding thump. Our dog is very light, so in the dark, when the light hits him just right, he has a sort of ominous looking blur, and I'm pretty used to it. But then I remembered that I had just let the dog outside. I called down to the husband and the kids and asked where the cat was, and he confirmed that he was perched in the window. I don't know what I think of all of this, but I feel like I'm going a little bit crazy. Anyway, I just needed to share this with a group of people who don't completely think that I'm nuts, so thanks for listening.